They won't say it to your face, but let's be honest. Most of the world assumes you're done. If you didn't make it by 30, the unspoken belief is you probably never will. They call that realism. But it's not realism. It's quiet condemnation. And the worst part? You've started to believe it yourself. You scroll through your feed and see people 10 years younger than you going viral, cashing out, becoming overnight sensations. And somewhere deep inside, you whisper to yourself, maybe I've missed my chance entirely. You don't admit it out loud, but it echoes every time you open Instagram. Every time someone asks casually, so what are you up to these days? There's a kind of shame that doesn't scream. It sits there in silence. A small, persistent voice saying, I should have figured it out by now. But what if I told you, you're not late? What if I told you that you've simply been lied to? What if the past decade of your life wasn't wasted time, but preparation? Not failing, but forging? Because here's the truth nobody ever bothers to say. The fire that burns hottest often takes the longest to ignite. Early success looks glamorous, but it's usually shallow. You've been building something no book or shortcut could give you. Resilience, depth, pattern recognition, the ability to sit with silence. The world worships youth because it's loud, but it's the late bloomers who change things permanently because they move differently, deliberately, with intention. You are not behind. You're becoming. See, after 40, something shifts. You stop chasing applause and start thinking about legacy. And maybe, just maybe, your so-called delay was actually protection. You weren't meant to rise when your ego was still fragile. You were meant to rise when your roots were deep. The world may measure you by clocks, but clocks don't measure awareness. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered, why does it feel like something in me is still waiting? This is your answer. You're not here to catch up, you're here to arrive. There's a lie that gets whispered so subtly, so often, that most people never realize they've already accepted it. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And it sounds like this. You should have figured it out by now. You're too old to start over. That ship has sailed. You hear it at family dinners. You hear it in conversations with old friends. You hear it in the way someone says he's still chasing that, as if ambition had an expiration date. Nobody ever says it directly, but it's baked into everything. Hollywood sells it. Job postings imply it. The tech industry practically worships 20-year-old billionaires. The message is everywhere. Succeed by 30, or you're already late. And if you're over 40 and still evolving, still dreaming, still building, the world doesn't call that strength. It calls it delusion. But let's pause here. Who decided that life peaks in your 20s? Who set the rule that your sharpest insights, your most impactful ideas, your true potential, all of it, had to show up before your brain has even fully matured? It's fiction, sold as fact. And because we were young, we believed it. We believed that speed equals success, that hype equals greatness, that if you didn't win fast, you wouldn't win at all. So we sprinted, not to build something real, but to catch up to everyone else's timeline. That sprint wasn't ambition, it was fear. Fear of being the only one left behind. Fear of being invisible. Fear of still not having it figured out when everyone else looked like they did. But here's the truth. You didn't fail. You were misled. The danger was never in moving slowly. The danger was in believing that speed equals worth. And that belief? It didn't start with you. It was programmed into you. Slowly, subtly, one repetition at a time. Napoleon Hill called this the law of cosmic habit force. It means that any thought, repeated long enough, becomes law inside your mind. It becomes the default script you live by. So when you hear that inner voice whisper, "It's too late," that's not your intuition. That's not realism. That's residue. Leftover programming from a culture that confuses youth with value. But let's look closer. What does youth actually bring? Energy? Yes. Confidence? Sometimes. But it also brings fragility, inexperience, identity that's easily shaken, a self-worth tied to how loudly the world applauds. That's why most early success is built on shaky ground, a hustle that looks like purpose, but is really performance. People who win fast often flame out faster, because what they built wasn't rooted in depth. It was built for applause. And yet here you are, maybe slower, maybe doubting, but still here, still asking the most important question: is there still something in me worth building? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. But to get there, you have to burn the timeline you were handed. You have to stop treating yourself like you're behind. You're not behind. You're just no longer running on somebody else's clock. And that is freedom. Because once you reject the lie, you can finally embrace the truth. Some of the most powerful lives don't begin at 20. They begin at 47, or 58, or 63. Not in a dorm room, but in a quiet evening when someone finally says to themselves, "I'm not done. I'm just getting started." So let's destroy the lie completely. If youth was the peak, why do so many people crash right after reaching it? Because when success comes before identity, you build a life that doesn't even belong to you. You perform. You please. You run fast, but you don't even know where you're going. And when the applause fades, so do you. That's not power. That's performance anxiety on a pedestal. But late bloomers, they're different. They've already endured silence. They've already survived invisibility. They don't build for applause anymore. They build for meaning. And while the world doesn't notice them at first, late bloomers carry something rare: pattern recognition. After 40, you see life differently. You've made enough mistakes to connect the dots faster. You've learned how to read people, read situations, read energy. Youth breaks when it's rejected. But you've been rejected before, and you came back. That's not weakness. That's calloused courage. Less ego, more clarity. You're not chasing proof anymore. You're building with purpose. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming your truest self. And here's what no one tells you. Individuation rarely happens in your 20s. Because in your 20s, you're still wearing the masks that society handed you. It's only later, when those masks start cracking, that the real self begins to emerge. When youth burns out, awareness ignites. And from that fire, something sacred is born: authenticity. Success without struggle creates arrogance. Success after struggle creates humility. One builds entitlement, the other builds endurance. Immature success is obsessed with being seen. Earned wisdom is obsessed with substance. And in a world drowning in surface-level success, the person who builds quietly, deliberately, authentically, that person becomes unshakable. Look at Colonel Sanders. He was 65 when he launched KFC. By then, he'd failed at more jobs and businesses than most people can count. But when others would have given up, he started over. Not with hype, not with youthful energy, but with vision. Or Vera Wang. She didn't design her first dress until she was 40. Before that, she'd been a skater, a journalist, an editor. She didn't stumble into fashion by accident. She arrived at it after decades of exploring. And that exploration gave her designs depth that youth alone couldn't provide. These aren't exceptions. They're reminders. Late bloomers don't bloom late. They bloom when they're ready. Let me tell you about Antonio. For years, he was the kind of guy everyone overlooked. A plumber. Dependable, polite, always there when needed, but never memorable. He wasn't fired because he was bad at his job. He was fired because he was forgettable. And when that happened at age 48, it crushed him. Weeks went by in a fog of depression. He felt like the world had finally confirmed what he always feared. Too old, too late, too finished. But one morning, staring at himself in the mirror, he whispered a new question. If I wasn't scared, how would I show up today? That question changed everything. He stopped calling himself a plumber. He rebranded as a leak prevention strategist. Instead of just fixing problems, he positioned himself as the person who prevents them. He raised his rates. He changed his appearance. He started publishing simple online tips about water damage. At first, nobody cared, but 6 months later, his inbox was full. Today, Antonio runs a team, but more importantly, he runs his own story. He's not bitter. He's not flashy. He's calm, sharp, unapologetically late. And that's what makes him dangerous, because the world expects the loud ones, the young ones, the fast ones. They never expect the quiet man who suddenly decides to rise. That's the power of the late bloomer. They don't sprint, they walk. And when they do, every step shakes the ground. Here's what you need to remember. Real transformation doesn't happen when everyone's watching. It happens in silence, when there's no applause, no recognition, no feedback loop. The war you're fighting isn't out there. It's in here. Your mind is not your enemy, but it will obey the worst voice inside you, unless you train it otherwise. Most people think their struggle is external. Money, time, opportunities. But the real struggle is internal. The daily script you repeat without even noticing. I'm too old for that. It's not realistic anymore. Maybe if I'd started sooner. They sound harmless. They even sound mature. But they're not. They're weapons aimed directly at your own potential. Every word you say to yourself becomes a command. And your subconscious doesn't fact-check those commands. It doesn't care about age. It doesn't check for accuracy. It just listens and obeys. That's why so many people end up living the same year over and over 40 times in a row and calling it a life, because their programming never changed. Napoleon Hill, in Think and Grow Rich, called this principle auto-suggestion. He explained that any idea, repeated enough times, eventually becomes accepted as truth by your mind. Most people practice auto-suggestion without realizing it. Not with affirmations, but with self-sabotage. They rehearse their limitations until they become part of their identity. I'm just not good with money. I've always lacked confidence. I'm not a risk taker. These aren't truths, they're repetitions. And the more you repeat them, the more real they feel. So how do you break it? By rewriting the script. At first, your new thoughts will feel fake. And that's okay. They're supposed to feel fake. You'll say things like, I am ready, I am wise, I am capable. And your old voice will laugh back. Yeah, right. But here's the secret. That resistance is proof the new script is working. It's not delusion. It's unfamiliarity. You're not lying. You're leading. Old script, I'm too late. Nobody will take me seriously. I've missed my chance. New script, I'm not late. I'm right on time. My scars are my experience. My delays are my depth. I'm not behind. I'm prepared. You don't need to believe it fully at first. You just need to say it daily, deliberately, even if your voice shakes. Because eventually, Your old self gets tired of arguing. And when it does, the new self begins to take over. The old you won't disappear in some dramatic moment. There won't be fireworks. Nobody will clap for you. It happens slowly, quietly, one choice at a time. One morning when you get out of bed, even though you feel defeated. One moment when you say no to old comforts. One yes to new discomforts that feel like growth. And then, one day you'll notice something subtle. The silence inside your head has changed. It doesn't mock you anymore. It mirrors you. It doesn't drag you backward. It nudges you forward. That's how you know the shift has begun. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped obeying the version of yourself that never believed in you. But there's another layer, and it's one most people ignore. You can rewrite your self-talk all day long, but if you go back to a toxic environment, it won't stick. You can read every book, visualize every morning, affirm your worth every night, but if your environment speaks limitation louder than you speak growth, you'll sink. Not because you're weak, but because environment always beats willpower. Here's the tricky part. Toxic environments rarely look toxic. They look comfortable, familiar, like old friends, like nostalgia. You laugh together, but listen carefully to what's being said. At our age, you can't expect much anymore. It's too risky to start something new now. Just be realistic. These aren't opinions. They're viruses, spoken softly enough that you don't notice until they've taken root in your identity. And you don't become toxic overnight. You absorb it, drip by drip. One quiet phrase at a time. Now let me be clear. You don't need to cut everyone off and go live alone in the woods, but you do need to become a gatekeeper. Not just of your time, but of your energy, because the conversations you allow become the code your subconscious runs on. You think you're being polite, sitting through another rant about how life is basically over after 40. But you're not being polite. You're being programmed. And there's a big difference between setting boundaries and suppressing emotions. Boundaries say, I care about you, but I can't allow your influence to shape me right now. Suppression says nothing. It just nods, smiles, and absorbs the poison quietly. You're not meant to carry other people's decay, especially when you're just starting to clean your own. Napoleon Hill didn't sugarcoat it. You become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not just financially, mentally, energetically, spiritually. If you surround yourself with people who think in limitation, you'll think in limitation. If your closest relationships revolve around regret and nostalgia, you'll build your mindset on regret and nostalgia. Your subconscious is always listening, not just to you, but to everyone around you. And every repetition you hear is a seed. If you're not careful, you'll wake up one day in a garden full of beliefs you didn't choose, but inherited. Picture this: a single drop of water. Harmless. Soft, unthreatening. But if that same drop keeps hitting the same spot on stone, hour after hour, year after year, it eventually carves the rock. Not through force, through repetition. That's what your environment is doing to you. Slowly, quietly, without drama. It's carving your identity. You think you're thinking for yourself, but really, you're echoing everything you've tolerated. So if you want to change your life, you must change what you allow. That means distancing yourself from people you love who quietly sabotage you. That means saying no to conversations that reinforce failure. That means walking away from groups that glorify who you used to be instead of who you're becoming. That means ending calls that always end with, "You should just be grateful for what you have." You're not ungrateful. You're becoming. And becoming requires purification. It's not cruel. It's survival. You don't need to justify your growth. You just need to protect it. Because this time, you're not rebuilding for approval. You're rebuilding to become unrecognizable. The danger of nostalgia is that it feels so harmless. It doesn't show up as an enemy. It shows up as comfort, familiar, warm, safe. But underneath, it holds you hostage. It ties you to a version of yourself that doesn't even exist anymore. You flip through old photos. You replay songs from the good years. You start stories with, "Back when I." But here's the part nobody says out loud. You don't actually miss the past. You miss the version of yourself who still believed, who tried without shame, who hadn't been bruised yet, who got back up quickly without the heavy weight of "I should have known better." But was that version of you really better? Or just more naive? Was that time really golden? Or are you just too frustrated right now to admit that the present still holds potential? There's a ghost you keep chasing. The person you thought you'd be by now. The one who had it all figured out by 28. The one who didn't lose direction. And when you compare yourself to that ghost, of course you feel behind. But here's the truth. That version of you never existed. That was a mirage, built from other people's timelines. You didn't fail. You outgrew the story you were handed. And now, it's time to release that ghost. Because as long as you cling to who you should have been, you'll sabotage who you're still capable of becoming. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona, the mask we wear in our early years to fit in, to be praised, to survive. That mask worked. It got you here. But it won't get you to where you're going. Real growth requires grief, not just for the time you lost, but for the person you used to be. Letting go of him isn't betrayal. It's reinvention. It's easy to worship the old you. It's harder to surrender to the becoming you. But ask yourself, is the past version helping you build? Or is it quietly destroying your ability to evolve? If it's not helping, then it's holding you back. And sometimes the bravest thing you can say is, "Thank you for getting me this far, but I'm not that person anymore." Then close the photo album. Stop replaying the old playlist. Walk forward, even if you don't yet know who you're walking into, because the future doesn't belong to who you were. It belongs to the one willing to rise without reference. Every true transformation has a season almost no one talks about. It's not glamorous. It's not inspirational. It doesn't look good on camera. But it's where everything changes. It's the moment after you've let go of who you were, but before you've become who you're meant to be. It's the void, the identity limbo, the season of invisibility. No titles, no certainty, no applause. The old dreams no longer fuel you. The new ones aren't clear yet. You're no longer accepted by the old crowd. But you haven't found your new circle either. And this is where most people give up. Not because they're weak, but because they think being undefined means being lost. But you're not lost. You're being rewritten. Rewriting takes silence, stillness, unrecognizability. Think of a seed buried underground. No light, no validation, nobody watching. But beneath the surface, everything is changing. Roots are forming. Structure is taking shape. That's what this season is, a sacred reconstruction, a quiet rebellion. And yes, it's lonely, but it's not a breakdown. It's a remodel. When you finally reemerge, you won't come back improved. You'll come back transformed. But here's where it gets dangerous. Even in this silence, you'll feel tempted to look sideways, to scroll, to compare your uncertainty with someone else's highlight reel. You'll see the young ones rising quickly. The old friends who seem like they figured it out. The colleagues who look certain, clear, miles ahead. And you'll wonder, what's wrong with me? Why is it taking so long? But remember this, they're not ahead. They're just loud. And loud doesn't mean deep. Loud doesn't mean wise. Loud doesn't mean lasting. History shows a pattern. The people who changed everything disappeared first. They went silent. They were mocked. They were misunderstood. Then one day they returned. Different, clear, untouchable. They didn't come back as improved versions of who they were. They came back unrecognizable. And so will you. But only if you endure the silence. Look around. The world is moving fast, but it's not moving deep. We're drowning in noise. Content everywhere. Opinions from everyone. Success measured in followers, not foundations. It's a culture obsessed with speed, but starving for substance. That's why the world needs late bloomers, not just to succeed, but to recalibrate the culture. Late bloomers don't chase validation anymore. They move with vision. They've already tasted failure. They've already survived silence. They're not scared of discomfort. They're not derailed by setbacks because they've lived through worse. Their fire doesn't scream. It simmers, not the flame of ambition, the slow burn of conviction. And conviction builds what noise never can. Things that last. We're entering a new era, one where charisma isn't enough, where style without substance collapses fast, where speed without structure becomes a trap. What the world is craving now is wisdom, not just ideas, insight, not just motivation, maturity. And wisdom can't be taught in a classroom or rushed in your 20s. It's earned through silence, reflection, reinvention, resistance. Late bloomers aren't competing anymore. They're guiding. They don't raise their voices to be heard. They lower the noise in the room. Because when they finally speak, everyone listens. Early success is often about proving yourself. Late blooming is about offering yourself. And that shift, when ego steps aside, is where legacy begins. Late bloomers don't care about being viral. They care about being remembered. They're not chasing trends. They're building what's timeless. So here's what you need to know. You are not late. You're refined. You are not old. You're initiated. The fire that took longer to ignite burns hotter, brighter, and longer. And this world, this chaotic, overstimulated, distracted world, needs that fire more than ever, not to make more noise, but to build what's next. You're not here to catch up. You're here to redefine the standard. It won't happen on a stage. There won't be a spotlight. No applause when you finally change. And that's exactly how you'll know it's real. Because rebirth doesn't begin when people notice. It begins the moment you decide. Not decide to try, not decide to dabble. Decide to rebuild, brick by brick, belief by belief, day by day, in silence. And yes, it will be lonely. But not because you're forgotten, because no one recognizes who you're becoming yet. That's how transformation always feels at first. Like disappearance. But disappearance is just the first act of emergence. You won't get trophies for healing. You won't go viral for doing the inner work. That's the price of becoming something deeper. Not decorated. Defined. Here's the last thing you must understand. Time is not your enemy. Comfort is. Comfort keeps you looping. Comfort keeps you apologizing. Comfort keeps you living someone else's life. But coherence, that's different. Coherence is when the inside finally matches the outside, when you stop pretending to be strong because you've actually forged strength, when you stop talking about who you're going to be, because you're already walking it. So if you're quiet right now, if you're invisible, if nobody sees the work you're doing, good. Stay there. Let the silence be your strategy. Let the doubts create pressure. Let the inner work reshape you. Because when you return, you won't come back slightly better. You'll come back so transformed that even you won't recognize who you were before. Your story doesn't end in obscurity. It begins there. That's the secret they never tell you. But now you know, and that means your return won't be noticed. It will be unavoidable.